In every quiet town, behind every friendly face, lies the possibility of a hidden truth. A neighbor, a colleague, even a family member. How well do you really know the people around you? On this show, we shine a light on the dark secrets lurking in plain sight. Stories of deception, betrayal, and crimes that shatter the illusion of normalcy. These aren't just crimes, they're betrayals of trust, lives built on lies, and the devastating aftermath when the truth comes to light. From elaborate cons that fool entire communities to intimate deceptions that tear families apart, we delve deep into the human capacity for deceit. We don't just tell the stories, we investigate the motivations, the cover ups, and the ripple effects that forever change lives. Because in the world of crime, the line between friend and foe, hero and villain, isn't always as clear as it seems. Tonight, we take you into the heart of a small Kansas town where a family's seemingly perfect life was built on an extraordinary lie. Over 12 years, the Summers family deceived their community, friends, and even their own children by living under stolen identities. What drove them to commit such a calculated crime? How did they maintain their deception for so long? And what happens when the truth finally catches up to them? Let's begin. It all started on the outskirts of Wilmington, Delaware, in 2001. John and Sarah Summers appeared to be your average American family. They had two young children, a cozy home, and the kind of life many would envy. But appearances can be deceiving. Behind their front door, financial disaster loomed. John had lost his job as a construction foreman, and Sarah's small business had failed to make ends meet. With debt collectors calling and foreclosure on the horizon, the couple was desperate for a way out. Desperation, as we so often see in stories like these, can lead to unthinkable choices. For John and Sarah, it led them down the path of identity theft. But this wasn't a one-time scam or a spur-of-the-moment crime. This was something far more elaborate. They didn't just steal money or forge documents, they stole an entire life. And not just one person's, but an entire family's. Their targets? Greg and Lisa Maddox, a young couple who had recently moved to Europe for work. With no immediate family nearby and little activity in the US, the Maddoxes were perfect targets. Over the next few months, John and Sarah carefully forged social security numbers, driver's licenses, and even tax records. By early 2002, the transformation was complete. The Summers family was gone. In their place were Greg and Lisa Maddox, living a fresh start in a small Kansas town. The Summers left Wilmington behind and moved to Larkspur, Kansas. They rented a house in the Maddoxes' names, using their stolen identities to secure loans and establish a new life. John, now Greg, started a contracting business, leveraging the Maddoxes' impeccable credit history to build his company from the ground up. Sarah, as Lisa, immersed herself in the community, volunteering at the local elementary school and joining the PDA. Their two children, now under new names, were enrolled in school and quickly adapted to their new reality. For 12 years, the Summers lived as the Maddoxes. To their neighbors, they were friendly, dependable, and deeply involved in the community. They hosted barbecues, attended church, and showed up for every school event. One neighbor, Karen Wilson, described them as the kind of family everyone wanted to be around, generous, helpful, always smiling. But behind the scenes, their lives were a delicate balancing act. John and Sarah knew they couldn't afford any mistakes. John was careful never to discuss his past in detail, deflecting questions with vague answers. Sarah avoided renewing her driver's license, knowing it would require a deeper verification of her identity. They paid close attention to their children's school forms, ensuring there was no paper trail that might expose their deception. Despite their caution, cracks began to show. Neighbors occasionally noticed inconsistencies in John's stories about his life before Larkspur. Sarah's paranoia became apparent to those around her. She declined certain opportunities, like applying for jobs that required background checks, with no explanation. Still, no one suspected the truth. It wasn't until 2013 that their house of cards began to collapse. That year, the real Greg Maddox attempted to file his taxes from Europe, only to have his return flagged for a duplicate filing. The IRS opened an investigation and quickly discovered irregularities in the Maddox's records. Someone had been using their social security numbers for years. At first, investigators assumed it was a typical case of identity theft, someone using the Maddox's information to commit fraud. But as they dug deeper, they uncovered something far more sinister. The Maddox's identities weren't just being used, they had been completely stolen. This wasn't a one-time crime, it was a long-term scheme involving an entire family. The IRS handed the case over to the FBI, who began quietly investigating the Summers. Agents tracked their activities, collecting bank records, school enrollment forms, and property deeds. Every piece of evidence pointed to a single conclusion. The Summers had assumed the Maddox's identities and built an entirely new life on that foundation. In January 2014, federal agents arrived at the Summers home in Larkspur. Neighbors watched in shock as John and Sarah were led away in handcuffs, their two teenage children standing on the lawn in tears. Inside the house, agents found a treasure trove of evidence: forged birth certificates, social security cards, passports, and tax documents. It was clear that the deception had been meticulously planned and executed. The fallout was devastating for everyone involved. The real Greg and Lisa Maddox, who had spent over a decade overseas, returned to the United States to find their lives in shambles. Their credit was destroyed, their financial records were a mess, and their reputations were damaged. Lisa described the experience as surreal. They didn't just take our names. They took our lives, our credit, our security, even our kids' future college savings. It feels like we've been robbed of time we'll never get back. For the Summers children, the truth was equally devastating. They had grown up believing they were Maddoxes, completely unaware of their parents' crimes. Now, they faced the reality that their entire lives had been a lie. In the summer of 2014, John and Sarah Summers stood trial for identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy. They pled guilty to all charges and were sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Their children were placed with extended family and began receiving counseling to cope with the trauma of their parents' betrayal. The case left scars that may never fully heal. The Maddox family is still working to rebuild their financial and personal reputations, while the Summers children are trying to reclaim their sense of identity. The deception didn't just destroy two families, it left a ripple effect across everyone who knew them. For over a decade, the Summers lived a lie. They forged friendships, built careers, and created a life that wasn't theirs. But in the end, the truth came to light, and the consequences were devastating. It's a chilling reminder that no matter how perfect a crime seems, it can never stay hidden forever.